to order. Lori, could you do roll call, please?
Abdurrahman?
Here.
Casey?
Here.
Rick?
Here.
Allison?
Here.
Nick?
Here.
Gabe?
Here.
Braden?
Here.
I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda is approved. Our first item of business tonight is to have a presentation by Garrett for Piper Sandler on refunding bonds.
Refinancing.
Refinance. The top says refunding. The item.
Oh.
The item 3 says
You're
right.
right. It's
Refunding bonds.
You'll talk us through it.
It's
Yeah.
same
I was gonna
thing.
say that's what I think I'm here to talk about, so hopefully that's right.
Refunding, refinancing.
Yeah. Tomato. We'll
There
talk
you
through it. No, well, thanks. Yeah, Garrett Pokup, worked with Tim in our office. My understanding is I think Tim was here last week.
Yeah.
So yeah, he did a 2-for-1 special, I guess.
Yeah.
I like to give Tim a hard time, so I like to say that he wanted to send somebody that was funnier, smarter, and, a little bit younger, I guess. So, but we'll keep that. Hopefully, Tim's not actually one of the two that's live. So when you see him next, keep that between us. But yeah, we're going to talk about just kind of what is a refinancing. I know the board and the district has done this in the past, but if there's new board members, just kind of talk through what is the process, how do we analyze, when does it make sense, for bonds that you have outstanding, that your district does have many that are. So we'll talk through what that looks like, when can you refinance, and if there's questions at the end, feel free here as we go. So the presentation, I think if all of you have that in front of you, if you don't, I do have copies. It's up on the screen as well. So what is a refinancing? So every time you issue bonds, there is typically what's called a call feature. Typically, if you sell 20-year bonds, which is what you've been doing for your GEO bonds, it's typically a 7 to 8 year call feature. So 7 to 8 years in, you can start to call the bonds if interest rates drop. That's at the district's discretion. So you're not forced to call the bonds early. You have the total option. There are some securities out there that have what would be called like a put option, where the investor would be able to force the issuer to have to pay the bonds off. That's not the case here. This is a call feature. So you'd be able to, at your discretion, if interest rates drop, or for other reasons, if you wanted to do a refinancing, you'd have that option. The second section talks about why pursue that. I'd say the main reason would be for interest cost savings, right? So just like if you own a home and all of a sudden interest rates start to drop, can lower your payment, saves interest, right? That one's pretty simple. But there are other reasons that you may restructure to either shorten the payments, maybe lengthen them out. So for instance, the sales tax revenues. Prior to 2019, districts had the sales tax revenues through 2031. So there were many issuers that issued bonds through the length of that sales tax, so out through 2031. In 2019, that got extended to 2050. So now we're seeing, even currently today, there's many districts that are issuing bonds well beyond 2031, and some districts all the way out through 2050. But to meet those revenue constraints in those early years, sometimes you have to restructure or refinance those bonds, and you're basically lengthening them out so that you can fit payments with new bonds being issued. So there are other reasons why a district might explore it that, technically on paper you might not be saving interest, but there are other reasons. In this case, that's not why the district would pursue that. But just know that there are other reasons that you may contemplate that as a board in future years. So for purpose of the conversation today, we're going to talk about kind of that first one, or it's the second bullet point on the presentation, that for interest cost savings. So how does the math work? It's pretty simple, right? Similar to if you own a home and you take out a mortgage and it's at 6% and rates drop to 5 or 4.5%. Well, you have a lower interest rate. In this example, Tim gave an example of, if you issue bonds at a 5% interest rate over 20 years, and you still have 12 years left after that 8-year call feature, and now interest rates are at 3%, well, that's a 2% interest cost savings that might make sense. Now, there's other considerations to take into that. So when issuing bonds, there are costs to issue. So legal fees, bond rating fees, finance and underwriting fees. So there's a myriad of components that go into that. One of those is the length outstanding of the bonds, so how much interest is still outstanding. So some of that is the length, but some of it is also the size of the issue that's still outstanding. So if you only have $1 million of par amount outstanding, there may only be 100,000 of interest left. There's probably not going to be a ton of savings, versus if you still have 10 million of par outstanding and you still have 3 million of interest, there might be a chance that, hey, there's, if interest rates drop, there's a meaningful savings there to pursue a refinancing. So we typically go through kind of a complete analysis of what does that look like as we monitor interest rates, and as they start to drop, which towards the early part of this year, interest rates were dropping. We've seen that now start to come up a little bit, but we typically are always monitoring that, and we know issuers that have bonds that are callable, just to kind of monitor, is there a potential savings for the district? So what does it cost? When we talk about the cost of issuance, I kind of talked about this, but you've got your legal, your bond counsel fees, bond rating fees, finance and underwriting fees. Now there are other methods of financing where you can maybe mitigate some of those. Districts can pursue what's called a private placement, where you would sell bonds directly to a bank. Now that could be a local bank here in the area, it could be a regional bank, or it could be a large national bank. But that will sometimes eliminate some of the costs. But then it's just an analysis of what's the market for a private placement. Can you still get competitive interest rates encompassing both maybe lower fees with what the interest rate is? So again, those are things that we look at, but just know there are different forms of financing, different than just a conventional financing like you've been doing over the last 3 years, where you go through an official statement process, you have bond rating fees, all of that. There are other financing options, but it just kind of depends on where's the market for that. Are banks, lending at favorable rates that would make sense? So could the district sell one new bond to fund new money and do a refinancing all at once? So yes, but with a caveat. So yes, it is possible. However, we typically would break it into 2 separate series. The main reason being there's some different IRS regulations that your legal counsel would look at, that typically there's going to be 2 sets of documents anyways. So the benefit of keeping that as just one bond series, you might think, is, does that save the district costs from issuing 2 series of bonds? Potentially, but typically we would see that you're going to break it into 2, and the guidance we've got from legal counsel is there's really not going to be a financial benefit by trying to do it as one. So generally speaking, if you were to look at that, you would maybe issue a Series 2026A as new money for the project, and then if you were going to look at a refinancing, potentially like a Series 2026B, that would be for that refinancing. So that's how most districts we've seen it happen. There are some situations where, getting on IRS regulations, you might do it as one, but just know if you wanted to go that route, it would probably still be 2 separate series, just for context. So the math for this current bond issuance that we're looking at is the district issued bonds back in 2018 that became callable in 2023. You still have a little bit north of 8 million of par amount left outstanding, and the average interest rate remaining on those bonds is 3.89%. So looking at how much interest is left, just north of 3 million between June 2nd of this year through when the final maturity is out in 2038. So fairly sizable amount of interest still remaining. So we're estimating, and this was back in February when rates were a little bit lower, so we'll talk about this a little bit more, but the average interest rate would have been about a 3.15% back in February when Tim was originally looking at this, which would have taken the total interest down to about 2.7 million. So you can see there, $400,000 to $450,000 of interest cost savings gets into the realm of maybe that makes some sense. Each district and each board is unique in terms of what is meaningful, what is significant, but this is what we were monitoring here a couple months ago. We've now seen interest rates rise a little bit. That average interest rate is probably up closer to about 3.5%. so it eats into some of that interest cost savings. You can see here, it says there would be $250,000 of bonding costs. I think that's a typo. My guess is he meant to say $150,000, and that might even be a little bit high. I think he's just estimating and being on the conservative side of looking at what fees might be. So today's savings with interest rates rising a little bit, inclusive of any bonding costs, might only be around $100,000. So not nothing, but given that it's $3 million of interest as a percentage, maybe a smaller amount. So today, we probably wouldn't recommend pursuing this, but something that we'll continue to monitor, and as there's been talks of potential, rate cuts and things like that, there's other things globally going on that will have some impact, but we'll continue to monitor this if rates continue to drop. So has the district refinanced in the past? Yes, as recent as back in 2021. The district refinanced both GO and sales tax bonds. So district has gone through that process. Actually, one of those was done as a placement, and one of those was, a typical conventional financing like you're accustomed to. Does a refinancing require an election or a public hearing? For GO bonds, no. So these GO bonds, if you wanted to pursue a refinancing, there's no additional public hearing. You don't have to go back to the voters. That's simple board action that you can pursue that. For sales tax bonds, it's a little bit different. There is still a public hearing process. So back in 2021, when the district refinanced those sales tax bonds, you did hold a public hearing, which seems a little bit odd when the citizens in the district want you to save money. Yes, but that's the law at least currently today. But in this case, we're talking about GO bonds. You would not have to go through a public hearing or an election. So I think maybe the biggest question that you may have as a board is what happens if interest rates drop again and you say, let's pursue this, right? What happens if in that time between when you say, let's do this, and we actually get to the sale date where we find out what interest rates are? What if interest rates rise? Are you kind of pot committed and you have to accept bids? And what if interest rates are actually higher than your current interest rates? The short answer is no. You have final say that even if we get to the bid day and interest rates are just not favorable, you have the ability to just reject all bids and just keep paying your bonds as you have been. So you do have the final say. Now you might say, well, what about bonding costs? Are we out any costs or fees? For the most part, no, but there are some fees that you may still have to pay. So typically, legal counsel, they're not going to typically charge anything unless you actually issue the bonds. Any of our fees would not be included unless we actually issued the bonds. The one that typically you would still end up paying would be the bond rating fee. That typically you have to go through the process and actually get the bond rating, typically 2 to 3 weeks prior to selling bonds. So generally you've already gone through that process, you've gotten the rating, and they usually aren't going to give you the benefit of the doubt if you don't move forward. Now what would that look like? Could be in the range of $20,000 to $30,000. So again, not nothing, but we try to do our best to look at where our interest rates, give you as a board as much information as possible going into that process. So that said, the bottom is, we do kind of internally have some metrics that we try to track. As a board, you can tell us if, what is meaningful. But typically we might look at a certain percentage of interest cost remaining. That if you can save, 10% of the existing interest costs. So if you have $3 million of interest outstanding currently, if you can save $300,000 or more, some districts would say that's, a good metric. In some cases, it's a net present value of savings of 2%. So par amount plus interest, take it times the time value of money, you can get to 2 to 3%. In some cases, we'll use that as a metric. So again, a couple months ago, back in February, we were looking at, hey, interest rates had dropped, but with some of the things really happening more globally, the bombing in Iran, some of those things, we've just seen a little bit of market disruption, and so interest rates have risen a little bit. I think in here Tim mentioned that even if rates dropped as much as 0.25% 0.4% or 40 basis points, that would probably be enough to get back down to where we were looking at 400,000 to 500,000 of savings. So we will continue to monitor that, and if rates start to drop, I'm sure Tim will be all over that and work with Lori to provide any information. But that's kind of the process of how it works, as a board, what to be aware of in terms of what that looks like. But I'll pause there, and if there's any questions about the process at all, what we look into, or Lori, if you've had conversations with Tim that you want to add.
Covered it all.
I want to say thank you for this PowerPoint that you put together. It pretty much walks it in layman term what's happening or what's going on. So really appreciate the detail. It pretty much answered all the questions I would have had personally. So thank you for that.
I suppose I'll probably give Tim credit for that.
Yep, there you go.
I'd love to take it, but in case he's watching, we'll give him credit for that.
I got a question. The bond interest rate has nothing to do with the Fed rate when, they look at it every quarter. So we can't call you and say, hey, I heard it went down today. It's a different deal.
Yeah.
But if that goes down, I would think this maybe.
Yeah, that's one.
But it's not tied directly.
It's not tied.
Okay.
Generally speaking, if you're going to see rates drop, then yeah, you'll see that happen. But usually by the time we hear that the Fed is cutting rates, usually that's already baked into investors that they've expected that to come, and so that's already kind of baked into where rates are.
All right.
There's a lot more globally that goes on. Really, what's the supply? Are investors sitting on the sidelines? And if there's uncertainty, a lot of times that's what happens. So is there money being put back into the market? Are investors aggressive? Right now, it's just with what's going on globally, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and so that's why we've seen a little bit of market disruption and rates maybe come back up.
Thank you.
Yeah, 20 to 30 basis points. So it is a little bit more difficult as a board to try and track that. I would say following the 10-year treasury would probably be a better metric to follow, that if the 10-year treasury starts to continue to drop, generally bonds, municipal bond rates would typically fall in line. So
Thank you.
Good question.
Thank you.
The other question, you've mentioned it, but I just want to make sure. So you guys are our fiduciary eyes out there, right? You're going to look at it. If something drops, either it triggers Lori to call you or Tim to call Lori and say, hey, you need to move on this. So that's inaccurate.
Yeah,
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, and we're not perfect, but we do our best to monitor that. But if, as a board, if you're curious, you can certainly reach out to Lori and say, hey, can you reach out and see where rates are? Is there, potentially any savings from refinancing? But we do, monitor rates. We're in the market pretty much every week with issuers, typically for, new money issuance. But so we know where rates are. And so, we look at, issuers that have outstanding bonds that are callable. To monitor, is there savings? So we do our best to, like this, try to keep boards informed, make sure they know. But Lori or his board members can certainly reach out, and if you want to know, we can certainly provide that information.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, when you said that it doesn't require an election or anything, so this would be basically just reissuing that same money. It wouldn't be
Yep, no new issuance of bonds, so for GEO, no additional authority needed. Yep, correct.
Other questions from anyone? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Very helpful, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, we'll move into item 4 then, to approve the 0.5 FTE Amana Elementary Principal Contract with Dan Dvorak. Now, the recommendation is to approve this 0.5 FTE Amana Elementary Principal Contract for Dan Dvorak.
Motion. Second.
Okay, any question or discussion here? Welcome, Dan. Yes, you're thinking. I saw you do it.
Yeah, well, with contract years being July 1st and on, so if we approve this, contract year becomes today and only payable when.
It allows us to be able to pay him between now and the end of the year.
Does it include, benefits and everything, all the package that comes with it, or?
We'll
No,
just pay it per day
Yep, per diem.
Okay.
for however
Okay.
however many days.
190, I think it was
Yeah,
190 hours a day. And we talked about 2 to 3 days at the most.
Yeah.
He's planning on coming to some PD. Again, the reason this is unique.
Yeah.
The reason this is happening is because we didn't have an interview team like we typically have. In our situation with the halftime principal, the way it played out, our conversation, I think it's going to help not only the staff but him be successful, and that's what we all want. So, and it's a minimal amount of dollars in comparison to what a positive start will do. A variety of needs when we get to August, so it's definitely worth it in my opinion.
Any questions? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so then we're gonna move into our closed session, as provided in section 21.5 of the open meetings law. So for the superintendent evaluation, so can I entertain a motion to move into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we will go ahead and move into closed session.